If you find value in these stories, please support this channel by liking and leaving a comment. It truly helps me continue this work. Thank you.
The crisp mountain air of Red Mesa, Colorado, once promised an enduring stillness. March 2016 saw this quiet town, nestled among pine and brush, become the improbable stage for a mystery that would defy easy answers. The vanishing of 11-year-old Ethan Ward and the man who had shaped his childhood, 48-year-old Samuel Brooks. There was no sudden outcry, no frantic alert, no telltale signs of struggle, just the mundane end of a school day, and then 2 lives erased without a trace. Red Mesa, a community of 6,000 souls, thrived on the rhythm of seasonal tourism and the steady thrum of timber operations. Its low crime rate, a comforting constant, was woven into the very fabric of the landscape, wide open spaces that whispered of safety, assuring residents that true danger, especially to children, belonged to distant cities. Homes, often set on expansive, pine-fringed lots, cultivated a trust among neighbors that allowed children the freedom to walk or cycle to school, a stark contrast to the guarded vigilance of urban life. It was against this backdrop of perceived security that a story far more intricate and unsettling would begin to unravel. Within this sheltered world lived Ethan Ward, a 6th grader described by his teachers as unfailingly polite, softly spoken, and possessing a deep, almost palpable attachment to the adults who anchored his world. He found solace in the quiet glow of video games and the delicate intricacies of electronic projects, often seeking reassurance when the predictable currents of his routine shifted. His mother, Melissa Ward, a nurse in the distant emergency room of Grand Junction, worked shifts that stretched long and unpredictable, leaving the scaffolding of Ethan's daily life largely to Samuel Brooks. Brooks, a former airline electronics technician, had retreated from his career several years prior. Neighbors remembered him as a man of quiet habits, methodical and reserved, his days filled with the steady rhythm of home repairs, his social circle a tightly drawn ring. For years, the bond between Ethan and Brooks had been forged in the crucible of shared routines. Summer camping trips under the vast Colorado sky, the patient resurrection of broken gadgets, and a tapestry of small traditions that formed the bedrock of Ethan's sense of home. But in 2015, the quiet rupture between Melissa and Brooks, a slow erosion of emotional intimacy, cleaved their household apart. A family court granted Melissa full custody, a decision that led her and Ethan to a smaller apartment, closer to the heart of town. To the adults, it seemed a manageable shift, a new chapter. Yet Ethan, a child of routine and deeply ingrained attachments, struggled more profoundly than anyone anticipated. School records from early 2015 painted a picture of increasing irritability, a visible difficulty in navigating his new environment, and the nascent signs of emotional distress. The move, intended to stabilize, instead created a schism in the boy's loyalties, a rift whose true depth remained unseen.
It later emerged that Ethan maintained a clandestine line of communication with Brooks, a secret Melissa never suspected. Emails, later exhumed by investigators, revealed a pattern that intensified with time. Short, desperate pleas appearing in the late hours. "I just want to come back home," or "Nothing feels right here." Some notes even carried promises of improved behavior if only he could return to the house where his childhood had taken root. To a discerning eye, these were not the coded whispers of abuse or threats. They were the raw, aching cries of a child caught in the maelstrom of attachment and change. Reaching for the adult he believed offered an unwavering harbor. In the months leading up to that pivotal March day, Ethan's behavior at school began to fray in ways his teachers deemed entirely uncharacteristic. He acted out, slipped from class without permission, and, in one alarming instance, dialed emergency services claiming Melissa had struck him. Deputies who responded found no injury, concluding the boy was buckling under the strain of family turmoil. The incident, though resolved, cast a stark light on the internal conflict that would ultimately shape the unfolding tragedy. By early March 2016, the quiet tension of the custody dispute began to manifest in subtle yet undeniable ways. Ethan's homeroom teacher noted a growing distraction, his focus fractured. Counselors, sensing the boy's distress, recommended a full psychological evaluation, a crucial step that, due to scheduling complexities, remained uncompleted. Meanwhile, Brooks maintained the quiet rituals of his life in the house he had once shared with Melissa and Ethan. He was not known to breach court orders, and no prior attempts to interfere with Melissa's custody had been reported. From the outside, their separation appeared settled, a matter of legal record. From within, the emotional currents surged with an unstable power. The morning of March 14, 2016, would later be identified by investigators as the turning point, a hinge on which the entire case would pivot. Before noon, Brooks delivered a sealed envelope to his attorney in Grand Junction. Its contents were prosaic: financial documents, an inventory of personal belongings. But a short, handwritten note nestled within spoke volumes, its tone steeped in resignation rather than meticulous planning. Though it contained no explicit declaration of self-harm, the phrasing carried a chilling resonance, resembling what officers would later describe as a message crafted for finality. This delivery was the last confirmed act of Samuel Brooks before he steered his vehicle towards Red Mesa. At Red Mesa Middle School, the day unfurled with ordinary precision. Ethan attended his morning classes, chatted casually with friends, following the familiar routines until just before lunch. He requested permission to step outside. The hall monitor, observing him walk towards the front exit, noted nothing amiss. Security footage then captured a gray SUV gliding to a stop at the curb. Ethan, without hesitation, approached the vehicle, slipping into the passenger seat. The license plate confirmed it: Samuel Brooks's car. No alarm bells rang. The pickup seemed calm, familiar, and the school had no immediate cause to suspect a violation of court orders. But by late afternoon, when Ethan failed to return home and Melissa realized no authorized guardian had collected him, the first fragile cracks in the facade of an ordinary Monday appeared. Calls to Brooks went unanswered. Ethan's phone had gone silent since lunch. Traffic cameras along Highway 141 recorded Brooks's SUV heading south, a route that snaked away from the town towards the sheer cliffs and narrow trails of Red Canyon. At 5:42 p.m., the vehicle's GPS tracker emitted its final signal from a remote location, then blinked into utter silence. These scattered details coalesced into the earliest pattern of alarm. Ethan vanished. Brooks's phone, silent. The SUV, severed from the digital world just hours after leaving the school. When investigators painstakingly pieced together this sequence, the first section of their report concluded with the line that would forever define the enigmatic case. That was the last time anyone saw Ethan Ward and Samuel Brooks.
When Melissa Ward, her voice edged with a growing dread, contacted the Mesa County Sheriff's Office shortly after 7 p.m. on March 14, 2016, her report was stark, unvarnished, and deeply disquieting. Her 11-year-old son hadn't returned from school. No one had notified her of an early pickup, and every call to his phone vanished into the void of voicemail. The deputy taking the report immediately flagged it as a high-risk case,
not because of overt evidence of danger, but due to the child's tender age, the chilling silence, and the documented emotional dependency Ethan harbored for an adult who no longer held legal custody. These factors, woven together, triggered an urgent search. The school confirmed, with unsettling speed, that Ethan had indeed left campus just before lunch. Staff, accustomed to the fluid schedules of students with diverse family arrangements, had initially presumed he'd been collected by an authorized guardian. Only Melissa's panicked call shattered that assumption. Administrators, reviewing logs and security footage, soon identified Samuel Brooks as the adult who had driven the child away. Officers raced to Brooks's residence on the fringes of Red Mesa. The house stood silent, locked, its windows dark. No vehicle sat in the driveway. A neighbor vaguely recalled seeing Brooks earlier in the afternoon, loading what looked like camping gear into his SUV. This detail, in isolation, wouldn't have raised an eyebrow. Locals often embraced the early spring weather for day trips into the foothills, but combined with Melissa's desperate report, it painted a picture demanding immediate attention. Authorities, securing a warrant, entered the quiet house, meticulously cataloging what was gone and what remained. Clothing, tools, electronic equipment, all were in their accustomed places. Ethan's bedroom appeared undisturbed. The only anomaly was the absence of Brooks's personal documents, nowhere to be found that night. Traffic cameras along Highway 141 offered the next crucial clue. Deputies spotted Brooks's SUV traveling south at 3:21 p.m., a single, small figure visible in the passenger seat. The route led away from the scattered pockets of civilization towards a sparsely monitored wilderness known for its treacherous ravines and sudden, stomach-dropping descents. Patrol units fanned out, searching for fresh tire marks, a stalled vehicle, any sign of a roadside emergency. But the rapidly fading daylight and the unforgiving rugged terrain swallowed visibility. By the following morning, the search had ballooned, a desperate, sprawling effort. Detectives called for aerial assistance. A state patrol helicopter launched into the vast blue, conducting a preliminary sweep of the Red Canyon region. The flight crew meticulously noted the sheer cliffs, the crumbling edges, and the dense thorny brush that could effortlessly swallow a vehicle or a campsite from the prying eyes of ground teams. Despite multiple passes, nothing resembling Brooks's gray SUV emerged from the mosaic of rock and pine. Simultaneously, officers tirelessly checked rest areas, gas stations, and trailheads along the highway, holding up photos of Ethan and Brooks to weary commuters and long-haul truckers. No verifiable sighting, no flicker of recognition emerged. The investigation gained a grim momentum on March 17th. Deep within a wooded section, off an unmarked service road, deputies located a makeshift campsite. Footprints, though indistinct in the soft soil, were clearly present. Several items hinted at recent occupation: 2 disposable water bottles, a partially eaten energy bar, and the still warm embers of a fire ring. Latent prints, lifted from the bottles, confirmed the chilling truth. Both Ethan and Brooks had been there. The presence of both sets of prints, however, created more questions than answers. It suggested the pair had not met foul play immediately after leaving school, but the site offered no clear direction, no compass pointing to their next destination, no clothing, no personal belongings, no phones, no maps, nothing to guide the search.
Later that afternoon, a friend of Brooks contacted investigators, reporting an unsettling text message from an unfamiliar number. The message, cryptic and chilling, spoke of wolves getting closer and a midnight train, phrases imbued with a metaphorical weight, echoing Brooks's past anxieties about court pressures and his creeping fear of losing his influence in Ethan's life. The timing of the message, sent days after the SUV's final GPS ping, threw a wrench into the established timeline. Analysts wrestled with its meaning. Was it a genuine threat, a symbolic cry of despair, or a calculated attempt to mislead those pursuing the case?
Search efforts intensified along the southern rim of Red Canyon as new intelligence arrived. A park ranger believed he had seen a gray SUV speeding along a ridge road at dusk on March 14th. He hadn't recorded the plate, but the description perfectly matched Brooks's vehicle. As he recalled, the SUV had been moving fast enough to seize his attention before vanishing around a treacherous bend near a cliffside overlook. The terrain in that area was notoriously hazardous, its soft edges prone to collapse under the weight of an incautious driver. This report became the first ominous indicator that the situation might transcend a mere custody dispute or a voluntary disappearance. In tandem with the grueling field operations, detectives meticulously reviewed financial data. Brooks's bank account showed no activity after the morning of March 14th. His credit cards remained untouched. Phone records indicated that both his and Ethan's devices ceased transmitting after midday, an unsettling pattern unless the phones had been deliberately powered down or destroyed. Notably, Brooks had made no purchases of fuel, camping permits, or supplies in the days leading up to the disappearance, making the existence of the temporary campsite even more perplexing. Investigators later theorized that supplies might have been stockpiled in his garage, though no concrete evidence emerged to support this assumption. Melissa, enduring multiple interviews, granted investigators full access to Ethan's computer and email accounts. The digital history corroborated the long-standing, often desperate communication between the boy and Brooks, including Ethan's fervent attempts to reconnect with the man he viewed as a grounding force. Nothing in these exchanges suggested a pre-planned runaway attempt, but the raw, emotional tone made it painfully clear that Ethan might have left school willingly, believing Brooks intended to help him. The intricate complexities of this relationship profoundly influenced how investigators interpreted each new piece of the puzzle. They could not rule out the possibility of mutual cooperation, nor could they dismiss the chilling likelihood that an adult had exerted undue influence over a vulnerable child. By March 18th, the case had metastasized. No longer a simple search for two missing individuals, it had become a grim investigation shadowed by the distinct possibility of a fatal outcome. The discovery of the campsite, the abrupt digital silence, and the ranger's report of the speeding SUV collectively pointed towards a trajectory into the unforgiving maw of Red Canyon. The sheriff's office acknowledged the mounting concerns, but underscored that no single piece of evidence conclusively confirmed harm. It remained entirely possible, at least in theory, that the pair had chosen to conceal themselves temporarily. This gnawing uncertainty marked the end of the initial frantic phase. The investigation now demanded a different lens, a deeper analysis focused not on whether Ethan and Brooks had left Red Mesa voluntarily, but on the far more chilling question, had they ever intended to return?
The morning of March 21, 2016, brought the first significant breakthrough since the discovery of the temporary campsite. A rancher traversing a remote maintenance trail near the lower basin of Red Canyon contacted the sheriff's office after spotting fragments of metallic debris glinting along a shallow streambed. The color and contour of the pieces struck him as distinct from old mining equipment, and he vaguely recalled the bulletin seeking information about a missing gray SUV. Deputies arrived within the hour, their initial assessment chillingly aligning with the rancher's suspicion. Several fragments appeared undeniably consistent with the exterior components of a late-model vehicle. Search teams fanned out from that location, methodically raking through the dense brush and jagged rock formations.
Within a short distance, they located a section of windshield glass bearing factory markings identical to those of Samuel Brooks. This grim discovery prompted the immediate deployment of a second helicopter, its mission now precisely focused: to survey the vertical, unforgiving walls of the canyon. The pilot, battling wind shear and navigating treacherous turns, flew low until finally reporting what ground crews could not see: the unmistakable outline of a vehicle resting upside down, impaled on a rocky ledge more than 100 meters below the main road. Recovery specialists, alongside a technical rope team intimately familiar with the brutal terrain, launched into a perilous descent. Their initial findings were stark. The SUV had suffered extensive structural deformation. The frame, a mangled accordion of metal, had twisted upon impact. Windows lay shattered, and the front end had been violently compressed inward. Despite the catastrophic damage, the license plate remained intact enough to confirm the vehicle belonged to Brooks. The absence of fire damage suggested the fuel system had not ruptured violently. The SUV had tumbled, a chaotic dance of metal and rock rather than exploding in a fiery inferno. But it was what investigators saw inside the wreck that introduced the most confounding, most chilling element of the entire case. The airbags had deployed, yet both front seats were eerily, unexplainably empty. The rear seating area lay crushed beyond recognition, but no biological evidence, no hair, no fabric remnants was visible. The debris field yielded miscellaneous papers, a broken flashlight, and a scattering of personal items, but nothing, absolutely nothing, to indicate that either occupant had been inside the vehicle at the moment it plunged over the cliff. This stark observation abruptly shifted the investigation away from a presumed accident and towards a question devoid of a clear answer. How had the SUV ended up in the canyon without the people who were supposed to be traveling in it? Specialists meticulously examined the ground above the drop point. Tire impressions, clear and stark, trailed directly towards the cliff's edge, revealing a straight, unwavering trajectory. There were no signs of desperate braking, no sudden swerving, no moment of hesitation. The marks indicated steady forward momentum, consistent with a deliberate approach rather than an uncontrolled slide into oblivion. Soil displacement patterns revealed the vehicle's underside had scraped the very lip of the cliff before its terrifying fall. The detail that seized the most attention, however, was the presence of a narrow wooden stake, fashioned from two sticks crudely tied with cord, planted several paces back from the edge. It was a simple alignment marker. Its placement suggested planning, premeditation. Someone had intentionally created a visual reference point leading directly towards the precipice.
Accident reconstruction experts later calculated the approximate speed of the vehicle prior to its descent. Based on the distance traveled through the air and the catastrophic deformation of the metal, they estimated a minimum velocity of 45 miles per hour. At that speed, no occupant could have safely exited the SUV in the frantic seconds before it reached the drop. The chilling implication was undeniable. Either the vehicle had been unmanned when it was sent careening over the edge, or its occupants had exited the car long before it was set into motion. The discovery, far from resolving the fate of Ethan Ward or Samuel Brooks, instead amplified the profound uncertainty. If the vehicle had been intentionally sent over the cliff, a carefully staged fatal crash, investigators now faced a far more complex question. Where had the two individuals gone after abandoning it? This chilling question forced search teams to widen their radius exponentially. Crews meticulously examined animal trails, long-abandoned mining tracks, and seasonal creek beds for footprints, discarded clothing, or forgotten equipment.
Trained dogs were brought in, their keen senses deployed, but shifting temperatures and relentless winds hampered their ability to track human scent. Several hours of coordinated sweeps yielded nothing but the confirmation that Red Canyon was an unforgiving, brutal terrain for anyone venturing through it without meticulous preparation. Detectives then meticulously reviewed the timeline, working backward. The campsite found days earlier could not be conclusively linked to the cliff area, but the undeniable presence of both individuals' fingerprints there confirmed they had been alive and mobile after leaving Red Mesa. The items at the campsite showed no signs of distress or urgency, a stark contradiction to the idea of a spontaneous flight into dangerous territory. On the contrary, the site appeared organized, almost routine, as if they had paused briefly during a planned journey. This detail deepened the bewildering puzzle. A calm, calculated stop, followed by a staged crash, implied profound, unsettling intention. Yet the motive behind that intention remained a chilling enigma. Attention also turned once more to the cryptic message sent from the unknown number to Brooks's friend. Investigators explored the unsettling possibility that Brooks had been attempting to create the impression of pursuit, a desperate flight. The phrasing echoed his earlier lamentations of feeling pressured by the court process and his pervasive fear of losing his parental role. If the message was indeed a deliberate misdirection to authorities, it would align perfectly with the staged crash hypothesis. But phone analysis revealed no clear link between the message's source and either of the missing individuals. The lack of correlation raised the unsettling possibility that someone else entirely had sent it, though no evidence emerged to identify that person or their connection to the baffling case. While investigators meticulously combed the canyon, Melissa worked tirelessly with detectives, providing every available detail about her former husband's habits. She explained Brooks's intimate familiarity with remote terrain, his years spent exploring off-road trails, knowledge that severely complicated search strategies, as he possessed the skills to move through wilderness areas without leaving obvious signs. Melissa also acknowledged Ethan's repeated desires to return to Brooks's home, making it disturbingly plausible that the boy had left school willingly. She passionately highlighted, however, that a child of Ethan's age would never have comprehended the inherent, life-threatening risks associated with canyon country. Her statements underscored the investigators' deepening concern. Ethan had been utterly dependent on the decisions of an adult who appeared increasingly intent on isolating himself from the world. The immersive narrator marked a profound turning point. It irrevocably eliminated the possibility of a simple accident and established clear, undeniable evidence of deliberate manipulation. Yet the chilling absence of two bodies, coupled with the lack of any secondary signs along the canyon floor, prevented investigators from closing the case, from declaring either individual deceased. Teams continued to re-examine the mangled vehicle itself, but no fingerprints, no footprints, no other traces were found to suggest anyone else had been involved. Every avenue, every lead, led back to the same agonizing, unresolved question. Had Brooks orchestrated an elaborate disappearance, or had both individuals met an end that left no physical trace behind? By the time the wreck was painstakingly hauled from the canyon 5 weeks after its discovery, the case file had already shifted categories. What had begun as a desperate missing persons search had transformed into an event whose primary piece of evidence, the empty vehicle, raised more profound contradictions than it offered conclusions. The canyon, silent and vast, offered no clarity, only a silent, indifferent backdrop to a disappearance that no accident theory could reasonably explain. The empty SUV, a silent witness to an unseen act, forced investigators to re-examine every single hour preceding its plunge into Red Canyon. In a missing persons case where no body is found, the timeline often becomes the only fragile structure holding the entire file together. Detectives in Mesa County began meticulously reconstructing the days prior to March 14, 2016, with the same unflinching rigor typically reserved for homicide investigations. Their objective was clear: to pinpoint any moment where an irreversible decision might have been made, any subtle shift in the currents of fate. Records revealed that in the days before collecting Ethan from school, Samuel Brooks had withdrawn a modest sum of cash from his credit union and purchased several standard camping items: water pouches, protein bars, and a compact tarp. These purchases in themselves were unremarkable for an individual who frequently sought solace in the outdoors. Yet investigators noted a subtle, unsettling detail. He made these transactions at small, privately owned stores, rather than the larger chain shops he usually frequented. Detectives debated whether this reflected an intentional avoidance of digital records or a simple coincidence, but the observation remained etched in the case notes. The sealed envelope and the letter Brooks delivered to his attorney on the morning of March 14, 2016, formed the next critical point of analysis. The wording contained no explicit declaration of self-harm, yet the tone resonated with an undeniable sense of finality. It referenced what is left of his belongings and extended gratitude to the attorney for assistance over the years. While not definitively conclusive, the phrasing bore an eerie resemblance to language found in other cases where individuals meticulously attempted to sever ties before vanishing. Investigators fiercely debated whether such wording should be interpreted as evidence of sheer desperation, cold premeditation, or a calculated attempt to establish a fabricated narrative.
The school's security footage marked the clearest, most unambiguous moment in the entire timeline. Ethan willingly leaving campus, stepping into Brooks's vehicle without a moment's hesitation. That single pivotal act defined the threshold investigators had to cross repeatedly. If Ethan climbed into the SUV willingly, it suggested an unsettling alignment of intent between the child and the adult. Detectives later noted that this willingness, while crucial, did not diminish the inherent risk to the child, but it profoundly shaped the psychological profile needed to interpret the bewildering events that followed. Once the SUV left the school, the documented movements became frustratingly sparse. Traffic cameras along Highway 141 captured the vehicle during mid-afternoon, heading relentlessly south. The footage showed no erratic driving, no indications of a frantic pursuit, and no other vehicles traveling unusually close. After the last camera capture, the SUV's GPS went utterly silent. Cell tower records revealed that both Brooks's and Ethan's phones powered off within minutes of each other. That simultaneous termination of signals implied a deliberate, coordinated action. Investigators, reviewing the data years later, continued to emphasize the chilling simplicity of the point. Two phones do not spontaneously shut down at the exact same time without a compelling underlying cause. The next concrete moment in the timeline arrived 3 days later, when search teams located the temporary campsite deep within the national forest. Fingerprints from both individuals appeared on the discarded water bottles and food packaging, undeniably confirming their presence at the site after leaving Red Mesa. What struck investigators most powerfully was the profound absence of disorder. Camps belonging to individuals in frantic flight often bear the hallmarks of haste: dropped items, tools left behind, clear signs of profound stress. This one, however, appeared meticulously composed. The tarp had been neatly folded before being discarded. There were no signs of a struggle, no indication that the site had been abandoned suddenly, in a panic. Such orders suggested a chilling sense of control rather than sheer terror. Following the discovery of the campsite, investigators leaned heavily on digital traces. Email records were subpoenaed, revealing months of intimate communication between Ethan and Brooks. Many of the messages expressed a raw frustration about the custody arrangement. But one particular line, penned by Brooks weeks before the disappearance, stood out, a chilling beacon to the psychological analyst assisting the team. Some situations only end when one side refuses to bend any further.
The analyst, careful not to classify it as a direct threat, instead recorded it as an indicator of rigid thinking, a possible precursor to an extreme, irreversible decision. Combined with a later equally disturbing phrase, "If I vanish, they won't take him," investigators saw the unsettling foundation of a mindset pushing inexorably towards a complete separation from the legal process. The next key event in the timeline occurred on March 18th, 4 agonizing days after the pickup at school. A friend of Brooks received an unusual text message laden with metaphoric language about being pursued and preparing to leave. Investigators attempted to trace its origin, but the digital trail remained frustratingly elusive. The message lacked the structured demands of a ransom note and did not align with Brooks's typical methodical style of communication. This left 2 unsettling possibilities. Either the message was purposefully stylized to imply urgent flight, or it originated from someone else entirely with motives yet to be deciphered. The message remained one of the many layers of uncertainty woven into the bewildering fabric of the case. After March 18th, no confirmed sightings surfaced until the mangled vehicle was located in Red Canyon on March 21st. Yet during this silent interval, 2 indirect accounts emerged in later interviews. A driver traveling at dusk along a remote service road reported seeing a gray SUV moving at an unusually high speed near the canyon area. The witness, however, could not provide a license plate number or definitively identify the driver. Days later, a resident living several miles from the canyon mentioned hearing a loud mechanical noise, possibly an engine revving, though she could not place the exact day. Neither account can be definitively confirmed, but both remain disturbingly consistent with the possibility that the SUV had been driven deliberately towards the precipice.
Once investigators had anchored the timeline around the crash site, they meticulously examined the logistics of moving unseen through the unforgiving canyon region. Samuel Brooks, it was known, possessed considerable experience navigating remote terrain. Yet even a skilled outdoorsman, they reasoned, would leave some signs: broken branches, disturbed soil, abandoned materials. None were found. The canyon's treacherous geography offered narrow escape routes, but none bore any evidence of recent passage. This profound absence created a baffling contradiction. If Brooks intended to fake a crash and escape, he needed a concealed route. If he intended to end both lives, the empty SUV offered no supporting evidence. The chilling lack of financial activity further complicated the already convoluted narrative. Neither credit cards nor bank accounts registered any use after March 14th. International border databases showed no movement under Brooks's legal name or any known alias. Detectives, delving into his former employment history, discovered he had once traveled under alternate spellings while working in South America. Yet those patterns, they confirmed, had long ceased. No corresponding travel activity emerged in the months following the disappearance. By early 2017, the timeline, far from narrowing, had expanded, its edges blurring into a frustrating expanse of uncertainty. New information arrived sporadically, each piece offering a flicker of potential, but no definitive resolution. A woman in Texas claimed to have seen a man and boy resembling Brooks and Ethan at a bus station, though she readily acknowledged her uncertainty. A year later, a former classmate of Ethan reported receiving messages from a gaming account using a nickname only Ethan had ever used. Digital forensics, however, could not definitively determine whether the account was operated by the missing child or by someone chillingly imitating him. Every new lead, every tantalizing clue, forced investigators back to the same bewildering timeline, one that transitioned from clear, documented movements into an impenetrable void. The cliff offered no conclusion. The campsite offered no conflict. And the final cryptic communications offered no definitive intent. Detectives, wrestling with the intractable nature of the case, described it as a sequence with a beginning,
but no visible middle or end. By the time the file was reluctantly moved into the cold case division, the timeline had become less a tool for progress and more a stark, unsettling map of unanswered questions. Each checkpoint remained stubbornly intact, yet every pathway between them dissolved into an abyss of uncertainty. The disappearance of Ethan Ward and Samuel Brooks existed within that profound silence, an outline without a conclusion, surrounded by events that should have clarified their fate, but instead only deepened the enduring mystery. By 2021, nearly 5 years after the chilling crash in Red Canyon, the disappearance of Ethan Ward and Samuel Brooks had transformed from an urgent, desperate search into a long, agonizing, unresolved absence. Cold case protocols mandated periodic reviews, and in this cycle, investigators approached the thick file with new analytic tools and a broader, more detached perspective. They were no longer seeking a dramatic revelation, a sudden, cinematic breakthrough. Instead, they meticulously scoured the records for any structural weakness in earlier conclusions, any overlooked detail, however minute, capable of subtly altering the intractable trajectory of the case. The decision to renew the search around Red Canyon stemmed directly from recent groundbreaking advances in underwater scanning technology. Earlier recovery efforts had been severely hampered by the canyon's ferocious currents, its treacherous deep pools, and the jagged, unforgiving rock formations that could effortlessly conceal objects. Sonar imaging conducted in 2021 allowed teams to map the canyon floor with an unprecedented clarity. Over several arduous days, divers and technicians meticulously scanned the region beneath and immediately around the crash site. No remains surfaced, no fragments of clothing were detected, and no secondary debris field emerged from the murky depths. The profound lack of discovery, while not definitively ruling out death, significantly limited the probability that both individuals had perished close to the site where the vehicle had landed. Investigators once again confronted the same agonizing question that had persisted like a relentless echo since 2016. If neither body remained in the canyon, where had they gone? Analysts revisited the mechanical assessment of the SUV's catastrophic fall. The previous finding, that the vehicle had traveled at a speed utterly incompatible with safe exit, remained unchallenged, robust. Tire patterns still suggested a straight, uninterrupted trajectory, devoid of any last-second braking. The narrow wooden stake, positioned several meters behind the cliff edge, retained its chilling relevance, now viewed by investigators as an improvised yet meticulously placed landmark, possibly used to align the vehicle's path towards the fatal drop. The profound consistency of these markers reinforced the chilling likelihood that the descent had been deliberately, meticulously staged. Yet staging in itself offered no explanation for the absence of a discernible departure route, nor did it clarify how two individuals, one of them a vulnerable child, could have moved away from the canyon without leaving any traceable, verifiable evidence.
It was during this meticulous phase of review that the investigative team revisited the intricate psychological dimensions of the case. Consultations with behavioral specialists framed Brooks as an individual who felt increasingly cornered, increasingly trapped by the suffocating grip of the custody dispute. His emails, though never overtly threatening, displayed a rigid, unyielding thinking and a pervasive preoccupation with control. Analysts pointed out a recurring, disturbing theme: the deeply entrenched belief that external systems, the courts, social services, even extended family, represented insurmountable obstacles to what he perceived as the correct outcome. Within such a deeply entrenched mindset, extreme solutions, however irrational to an outside observer, could appear entirely rational, entirely justified to the individual, even while fundamentally contradicting established legal or ethical norms. For investigators, the core question subtly shifted, no longer whether Brooks intended an irreversible act, but rather how far was he truly willing to go to prevent the agonizing possibility of Ethan being permanently separated from him. Parallel to the behavioral review, financial analysts meticulously retraced Brooks's monetary history with excruciating attention to detail. The profound absence of transactions after March 14th was unequivocally reaffirmed. Yet, this very void, this digital silence, itself became a crucial data point. Individuals attempting to vanish typically minimize their digital footprints, certainly, but almost universally continue to rely on some form of ongoing financial support. Furtive cash exchanges, discreet fuel purchases, or indirect electronic patterns. Here, there was nothing. If Brooks and Ethan had miraculously survived beyond the fall, they had done so without engaging in any measurable activity tied to their identities, a scenario that chillingly suggested either meticulous prior planning or the existence of external assistance. Neither scenario, however, could be definitively confirmed. In the same period, investigators painstakingly examined a new cluster of tips. Most, as is common, lacked any corroboration, quickly fading into the realm of speculation. But a few carried enough tantalizing detail to warrant deeper, more exhaustive evaluation. One came from a former trucker who believed he had seen a man and a boy matching their description near a remote rest stop in northern Arizona. His account included specific, verifiable details about the boy's distinctive red backpack, an item Ethan had been known to carry. Yet video footage from the rest stop had long since been overwritten, its digital memories erased, and no physical evidence remained. The sighting was reluctantly filed as possible, but unverified. The most disruptive, most tantalizing tip arrived through the Digital Crimes Division. A teenager who had once shared classes with Ethan reported receiving messages from an online gaming account that used a username Ethan had created years earlier. The messages were tantalizingly brief and profoundly ambiguous, containing only a simple greeting and a vague reference to an inside joke that only Ethan would have understood. Digital tracing, however, showed the signal routing through a labyrinth of servers located outside the country, making clear attribution an impossible feat. Investigators, frustrated, could not definitively determine whether it originated from Ethan himself, from a chilling imitator, or from a completely unrelated user who merely happened to adopt a similar, uncanny username. The ambiguity yielded more speculation than genuine clarity. Still, investigators noted the precise timing. Nearly a year after the disappearance, long after public interest had waned, the message had surfaced, a ghost in the machine. As analysts meticulously assembled these disparate elements, they organized them into three distinct yet equally unsettling working scenarios. The first involved a murder-suicide, chillingly carried out in stages, with the staged crash intended as the final, desperate act. Although the attorney's letter provided a potential emotional backdrop, its vague, ambiguous wording could not be interpreted as definitive. More importantly, the profound, inexplicable lack of bodies contradicted typical patterns for such cases. Without remains or irrefutable remnants, the theory lacked the solid foundation needed for a conclusive determination.
The second scenario involved the deliberate staging of both deaths to facilitate a long-term, meticulously planned disappearance. Investigators found this theory more structurally coherent, more compelling. The controlled vehicle trajectory, the chilling absence of forensic evidence inside the SUV, and Brooks' previous international work His experience in navigating complex, clandestine environments strongly suggested he possessed the intricate knowledge and the meticulous planning ability required for such an elaborate operation. Yet several formidable obstacles persisted. A staged disappearance involving a child of Ethan's age requires a level of coordination, resources, and unwavering secrecy that extends far beyond the capabilities of a single individual acting alone. No trace of such extensive coordination ever emerged. Additionally, the profound emotional volatility so clearly indicated in Ethan's emails suggested he would almost certainly struggle to maintain long-term silence, his emotional needs betraying the facade. The third scenario envisioned an unintended accident or a catastrophic miscalculation, followed by a desperate, improvised escape. This theory accounted for the unsettling possibility that Brooks and Ethan had voluntarily exited the vehicle before it plunged over the cliff, perhaps intending to create the illusion of death, but without a fully formed viable plan for survival afterward. However, investigators found absolutely no environmental evidence to support this sequence of events. Every conceivable path away from the canyon offered numerous opportunities for detection. Treacherous mud patches, impossibly steep inclines, perilous water crossings. Yet none revealed a single footprint, no telltale clothing snags, no abandoned supplies. Each scenario, while illuminating fragments of the baffling disappearance, ultimately failed to assemble a complete, coherent explanation. Detectives, confronting the intractability of the case, described it as one where all three theories remained structurally possible, yet none achieved undeniable dominance. The strongest elements pointed irrevocably toward a staged fall, yet the operational details, the sheer logistical demands required for survival after such an elaborate staging, utterly lacked supporting evidence. Conversely, the compelling psychological and circumstantial elements supporting a murder-suicide theory starkly conflicted with the physical evidence, or rather, the profound absence of physical evidence at the canyon. With each attempt to synthesize the bewildering data, investigators found themselves returning to the same unresolved, silent center. By late 2021, the renewed investigation had, in fact, narrowed the range of plausible possibilities, but it had not, crucially, yielded a definitive answer. The team's closing report articulated the impasse in careful, measured language. The case trajectory shows signs of deliberate planning, yet the post-event silence and absence of supporting traces limit the ability to affirm any single conclusion. For the Ward family, this meant the same agonizing limbo persisted. No confirmation of life, no confirmation of death, only a case file that grew increasingly complex, increasingly opaque, as more agonizing time relentlessly passed. The reopened investigation did, in the end, not solve the disappearance of Ethan and Samuel Brooks, but it did fundamentally reframe it. The central question shifted from whether the canyon held the answers to whether the truth lay entirely outside Red Mesa. It became a case defined not by what was found, but by what remained conspicuously, chillingly, persistently absent. Evidence of survival, evidence of death, or, perhaps most agonizingly, evidence of return. By the time the voluminous case file reached the Colorado Coroner's Office in early 2022, the disappearance of Ethan Ward and Samuel Brooks already carried the chilling hallmarks of a legally ambiguous death. The canyon crash, the profound absence of human remains, and the bewildering mixture of intense personal distress intertwined with meticulous planning had placed the investigation at a crossroads where criminal, civil, and family law concerns intersected with maddening complexity. The coroner's prescribed role was not to solve the overarching mystery, but rather to determine whether the extensive, yet stubbornly inconclusive, available record supported a definitive declaration of death, and if so, under what specific statutory category. Yet the evidence, though substantial in volume, remained stubbornly, frustratingly inconclusive in its direction. What unfolded in the sterile, somber hearing room mirrored the inherent complexity of attempting to apply rigorous legal standards to a case built almost entirely on missing pieces, on silent voids. The proceeding began with a painstaking, methodical reconstruction of the last verified hours of both individuals. Investigators reiterated the known sequence: Ethan leaving the school grounds with Brooks, the southbound movement captured by traffic cameras on Highway 141, and the eventual, chilling failure of the vehicle's GPS signal. The coroner noted that such a sequence would, under normal circumstances, squarely fit within the parameters of a suspected fatal event, especially when linked to an abandoned vehicle found in a location where human survival was overwhelmingly unlikely. However, the central intractable problem persisted. The SUV did not contain any bodies, nor did the unforgiving canyon environment offer any discernible signs of human remains. Without that crucial physical endpoint, the classification of death became a thorny legal interpretation, a philosophical debate, rather than a definitive biological certainty.
Experts in accident dynamics testified with solemn authority that the SUV had descended the cliff at a speed that would have rendered survival utterly impossible for anyone inside. That crucial point, they asserted, was not contested. What remained in fierce dispute, however, was whether anyone had, in fact, been inside the vehicle at the precise moment of its catastrophic fall. Analysts reiterated their prior, chilling conclusion. All indicators unequivocally suggested the descent was unmanned. The profound absence of seatbelt marks, the lack of blood, hair fibers, or tissue inside the cabin all supported that disquieting assessment. When the coroner, pressing for clarity, asked whether animals, water flow, or natural decomposition could completely, utterly erase all traces, the forensic team conceded that total erasure would be improbable, a statistical outlier, but not, crucially, impossible. The dynamic canyon environment, with its rapid water movement, its abrasive rock beds, and its constantly shifting sediment, could indeed degrade biological evidence with startling speed. Still, the complete, utter lack of any indicator raised a profound procedural hesitation within the coroner's mind. The coroner, acknowledging the depth of the uncertainty, recorded it as material. The hearing then pivoted to the sensitive, volatile realm of psychological intent, a delicate area where legal interpretation must meticulously balance professional caution with the available, often ambiguous documentation. Testimony from family court representatives painted a stark picture of Brooks's escalating frustration with custody rulings and his increasing, almost obsessive fixation on what he perceived as the impending, unbearable loss of Ethan. Email excerpts presented to the court with grim seriousness showed patterns of deep worry, simmering resentment, and a deeply held belief that conventional systems had irrevocably failed him. Yet, crucially, the emails also evinced a chilling degree of planning, coherence, and a structured, almost deliberate approach to future actions. The coroner noted that such inherent duality, profound distress on one hand, meticulously deliberate preparation on the other, did not neatly, conveniently support a singular conclusion of either suicide or homicide. Rather, it dramatically complicated any attempt to definitively assign motive or to conclusively classify the ultimate endpoint of the baffling disappearance. Civil attorneys representing Melissa Ward addressed another, equally agonizing dimension: the profound practical consequences of the gnawing legal ambiguity. Without a definitive declaration of death, she remained unable to obtain a death certificate for her son, making it utterly impossible to make crucial decisions related to inheritance, insurance claims, guardianship, or long-term official documentation. She could not even legally close Ethan's educational file, leaving it in an unbearable state of suspended animation. For her former spouse, the question was different, yet equally entangled. A definitive declaration of Brooks's death would trigger complex estate transfer processes, dissolve any unresolved debts, and bring closure to a myriad of administrative obligations. Without it, all such matters remain suspended in a purgatory state. The law, in its essence, demanded clarity. yet clarity remained agonizingly, persistently absent. In parallel, the Mesa County Sheriff's Office presented its own institutional concern, its own practical dilemma. Declaring Ethan and Brooks legally deceased would profoundly shift investigative priorities. If the deaths were officially classified as accidental, the file might be permanently archived, fading into the forgotten annals of history. If classified as a homicide-suicide, the file could be closed with a sense of finality, however tragic. However, if the coroner, in an act of profound judicial caution, refused to declare death, the case would remain in an active but agonizingly low priority status, requiring periodic review and keeping precious resources loosely, inefficiently committed. Law enforcement representatives did not, they stressed, advocate for any specific outcome, but they emphasized with professional gravitas the stark operational reality. The coroner's decision would irrevocably shape the long-term handling of this haunting, unresolved case. During the second week of painstaking testimony, a forensic anthropologist addressed a question that had hovered like a specter over the file since its earliest days: whether two human bodies could realistically remain undiscovered in the vast, labyrinthine canyon system for years. She explained with chilling academic precision that the unique combination of vertical terrain, intermittent, raging flooding, and deep, treacherous crevices could indeed conceal human remains indefinitely. Bones, she posited, caught in unseen fissures or transported into inaccessible channels by the relentless currents, might never, ever be recovered. This sobering assessment left the coroner confronting a profound paradox. The possibility of death remained entirely plausible, tragically real. Yet the stubborn, profound absence of any evidence, any physical trace, remained equally, chillingly plausible. The entire case, he realized, rested on two competing, equally powerful forms of uncertainty, rather than contrasting, concrete facts. One of the more challenging, emotionally charged exchanges occurred when the coroner directly asked investigators whether they believed Brooks had meticulously orchestrated a disappearance for both himself and the child. They answered with professional restraint, their voices carefully modulated. The meticulous staging of the vehicle's fall, they conceded, aligned compellingly with that chilling theory. The profound lack of human remains, too, aligned with it. But the persistent absence of any verified sightings, any financial activity, or any credible communication in the agonizing years after the event relentlessly weakened the theory's long-term viability, its enduring plausibility. The lead detective, his voice tinged with the weariness of years, summarized the fundamental dilemma in a single poignant sentence. The case shows signs of planning, but no signs of continuation. That stark, unvarnished statement was entered into the official record as a profound reflection of investigative impasse.
7 years after Ethan Ward and Samuel Brooks were last definitively confirmed alive, the case now occupies a quiet yet stubbornly persistent place in the institutional memory of Mesa County. It is no longer the frantic, all-consuming focus of daily investigative work, yet crucially, it has not fallen into the abyss of abandonment. The file remains categorized as an active missing persons case with a suspected fatal outcome, meticulously reviewed periodically to ensure no overlooked lead gains sudden, unexpected relevance with the relentless passage of time or the advent of new technological advancements. For Melissa Ward, the cruel passage of years has not, in any way, simplified the profound, aching absence. She continues to inhabit the same apartment they shared when Ethan was last in her care, a silent testament to a life paused. The room he once used remains largely unchanged, a frozen tableau of childhood. The walls still bear the posters he so carefully chose. The small, worn, handheld game device he carried on weekends rests precisely on his bedside shelf. These objects serve less as somber memorial items and more as anchors, fixed points she desperately returns to when the bewildering legal and investigative uncertainty becomes too overwhelming, too unbearable to manage. Without a death certificate, she remains unable to complete several crucial administrative processes, but she also, with a raw honesty, admits she has never been entirely certain she would ever request one, even if the option were readily available, a tangible acknowledgement of a finality she cannot truly grasp. The town of Red Mesa itself has subtly evolved, its changing landscape gradually obscuring the raw memory of the event for its newer residents. Tourism has subtly increased. Several older, long-standing businesses have quietly closed their doors, and many of the people who lived through the agonizing period of the disappearance either relocated, seeking new beginnings, or retired, their memories softening into the haziness of general impressions rather than sharp, specific details. Local law enforcement officials acknowledge that this gradual, almost imperceptible erosion of first-hand memory is one of the natural, unavoidable limitations of long-term missing persons inquiries. Without sustained visibility, the crucial peripheral information, the faint whispers of eyewitness accounts, inevitably tends to fade into the ether. Within the Sheriff's Department, the case file of Ethan Ward and Samuel Brooks stands as a stark, enduring reference example of the profound investigative constraints that arise when a disappearance tragically intersects with bitter family conflict, the unsettling possibility of deliberate staging, and the ultimate, frustrating absence of physical remains. Officers who joined the department after 2020 meticulously study it as part of their rigorous training on custodial disputes and complex runaway risk assessments. The lead detective, now easing into a well-deserved semi-retirement, summarizes the case in a manner that meticulously avoids any form of speculation, any hint of emotional conclusion. "This file isn't empty," he states, his voice carrying the weight of years. "It simply lacks the one detail that would transform every other piece into a coherent, undeniable chain." The broader impact of the case lies mainly in subtle yet significant policy adjustments. Schools throughout the region have implemented far more stringent departure verification procedures, now requiring explicit dual confirmation for any student leaving campus during the instructional day. The county, driven by the lingering shadow of the Ward Brooks disappearance, also strengthened documentation requirements in custody disputes, aiming to meticulously reduce any opportunities for misinterpretation or unilateral action by non-custodial guardians. As for the search itself, no new credible sighting has been recorded in several years. Occasional tantalizing claims still arise, someone vaguely resembling Ethan seen in a distant border town, a cryptic message online matching an old username, but none, crucially, withstands rigorous verification. The sheriff's office maintains a steady, unwavering stance. Until human remains are found, or a confirmed, verifiable sighting is documented, the case will, stubbornly, agonizingly, remain open. Standing at the edge of Red Canyon today offers no new answers, no sudden dramatic revelations. The terrain is unchanged, as indifferent and silent as it was on that fateful March day. The silence that pervades the vast echoing space is the same. The question that endures, that gnaws at the edges of memory, is not why the case grew so profoundly complex, nor even how the SUV ultimately reached the canyon floor in such a bizarre, empty state. The unresolved point, the raw, aching wound, remains precisely the same as on that first terrifying evening. By what agonizing sequence of choices or events did two people vanish so utterly, so completely, leaving behind a meticulous trail that stops abruptly at the edge of a cliff, but never, ever, explains what truly came after?